The mockery of Myth Station Eternum drifted in the void between three ancient stars, a testament to the Galactic Assembly's 10,000-year reign over civilized space. Its crystalline spires caught starlight and bent it into impossible patterns, each beam carrying data from 1,000 worlds. Today, those beams would carry humanity's shame across the galaxy. Ambassador Elena Reyes stood before the Superior Council, her black uniform stark against the bioluminescent walls that pulsed with alien life. Beside her, Marcus Chen gripped his datapad with white knuckles, watching their carefully prepared presentation crumble under the weight of alien laughter. They had traveled 6 months through the quarantine zone's edge, burning precious fuel reserves Earth could barely spare, all for this moment of humiliation. Overlord Krex dominated the central platform, his silicon-based form shifting like living stone. When he spoke, his voice resonated through frequencies that made human bones ache. The translation matrix converted his words into something Elena could understand. Though understanding and accepting were vastly different things, the Council had reviewed humanity's petition for membership and found it amusing rather than compelling. Tell me, Ambassador Reyes. Krex's form solidified into something resembling a face, though no human would call it friendly. Your species still believes in gods and monsters. You name your planets after dead deities. Your children learn about dragons before they learn mathematics. How can such a primitive culture contribute to our enlightened federation? The Zephrani delegate, a creature of pure energy contained in a humanoid shell, flickered with amusement. I have studied their entertainment broadcasts. They obsess over heroes with impossible abilities. Flying men, gods of thunder, warriors who cannot die. Such fantasies reveal a species unable to accept their limitations. Elena remained still, though Marcus saw her jaw tighten. She had expected this. Every human diplomat for the past century had faced the same condescension. The galaxy had achieved faster-than-light travel while humans still fought with chemical rockets. They wielded antimatter while Earth struggled with fusion. The technological gap was undeniable. But Elena knew something these ancient races had forgotten. You speak of our myths as weakness, Elena said, her voice carrying through the chamber with unexpected authority. You see our stories as proof of primitive thinking. But you miss the most important question. Why do we tell these stories? The Morvac representative, whose species had evolved beyond physical form millennia ago, projected dismissive colors. Because you cannot accept reality. You dream of strength you do not possess. You imagine victories you cannot achieve. This is why the quarantine must remain. A species lost in fantasy poses danger to themselves and others. Elena smiled, an expression that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Humans showed teeth when aggressive, they remembered. Such a primitive threat display. We tell stories of monsters because we remember when we were prey. We tell stories of heroes because we remember what it took to survive. Every myth, every legend, every impossible tale is a lesson wrapped in narrative. You call them fantasies. We call them blueprints. Overlord Krex's form darkened, the equivalent of a frown. Blueprints for what exactly? Your ships can barely leave your system. Your weapons are kinetic projectiles and crude nuclear devices. You speak in riddles because you have no substance to offer. Blueprints for becoming what we need to be, Elena replied. You achieved spaceflight and forgot your origins. You developed technology and abandoned your stories. But stories are how species remember who they are when the darkness comes calling. And darkness always comes calling. The assembly erupted in laughter. Even species without traditional vocal cords found ways to express their amusement. The Ilari sang harmonics of condescension. The beneath undulated in patterns of mockery. The crystalline shapers chimed their dismissal in frequencies that hurt human ears. Commissioner Talara of the Viren Collective, the oldest member of the Council, raised the appendage for silence. Ambassador Reyes, your passion is noted but irrelevant. The vote was taken before you arrived. Humanity's petition is denied. The quarantine remains. You will return to Earth and cease these pointless requests. And perhaps another 1,000 years, if your species survives and evolves beyond superstition, we may reconsider. Marcus finally spoke, his youth making his voice crack slightly. You're making a mistake. Earth has changed. We've had 100 years behind the barrier to what? Krex interrupted. To develop technology that would take us moments to create? To build ships from metal and ceramic while we bend space-time itself? Child, your species belongs in a museum, not this assembly. Elena placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, silencing him. We understand the Council's decision. We will relay it to Earth. But before we go, I leave you with one final thought. You judge us by our stories, but you haven't asked the right question. You haven't asked what kind of stories a species tells when they know something is coming, when they can feel it in their bones, when every instinct screams that the night is full of terrors. She turned to leave, then paused. We've been telling stories about invasion for 200 years, about monsters from beyond the stars, about the need for unity, sacrifice, and impossible heroism. You think these are fantasies. But what if they're memories of things that haven't happened yet? What if every human child knows these stories because we needed them to be ready? Overlord Krex's form shifted dismissively. More human mysticism. Guards escort them to their ship. This session is concluded. As Elena and Marcus were led away, Elena activated her private communicator with a touch. The message was brief and coded in Old Earth military cipher. Rejection confirmed. Initialize Ragnarok protocol. The wolves are at the door. Marcus looked at her in confusion as they walked through Station Eternum's grotesque beauty. Biological corridors pulsed with alien life. Gravity fields shifted in patterns that defied human comprehension. Technology so advanced it looked like magic surrounded them, and yet Elena smiled. I don't understand, Marcus whispered. They humiliated us. They laughed at everything we are. They laughed at our stories, Elena corrected. They forgot that humans don't tell stories about what is. We tell stories about what we need to become. And we've had 100 years to become something they cannot imagine. Their ship, the UES Cassandra, looked pathetic next to the elegant vessels of other species, chemical thrusters, rotating sections for gravity, armor plating that belonged in a museum. The dock workers, insectoid Clith, chittered their amusement as the humans boarded their primitive craft. As the Cassandra departed, Elena stood at the observation port watching Station Eternum shrink into the distance. Marcus joined her, still processing the day's humiliation. What's Ragnarok protocol? He finally asked. The end of one story, Elena said softly, and the beginning of another. The council thinks our quarantine keeps us in. They never considered that maybe, just maybe, we wanted them to think that maybe we've been using it to keep something else out while we prepared. Before Marcus could ask more questions, alerts began flashing across Station Eternum. Ships were disappearing in the outer spiral. Colony worlds were going dark. Something was moving through the galaxy's edge, something that consumed everything in its path. The Shadow Swarm had arrived, right on schedule, and humanity's century of preparation behind the barrier was about to pay off in ways the galaxy could never imagine. When legends became reality, 3 months after the Assembly's rejection, the galaxy burned. The Shadow Swarm moved through systems like a plague of locusts, leaving nothing but dead worlds and scattered atoms in their wake. No one knew where they came from. These creatures of living darkness that fed on energy itself. They consumed stars, drained planets, and turned the galaxy's greatest technologies into fuel for their endless hunger. Admiral Sarah Knox stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The ship didn't have a name the aliens would recognize. In their databases, it was still listed as primitive human vessel. Classification negligible threat. But the crew called her Prometheus, and she was about to bring fire to the gods. Shadow Swarm has consumed another Viren world, her tactical officer, Commander James Park, reported. The collective's fleet lasted 18 minutes. Their antimatter weapons just fed the enemy. Energy shields made them stronger. The most advanced civilization in the galaxy might as well have been fighting with sticks. Knox nodded. She had expected this. Every human above the rank of captain had expected this. For 100 years, Earth's deep space monitors had detected something moving beyond the galactic edge. Something hungry. Something the barrier couldn't stop forever. While the galaxy laughed at human mythology, Earth had been preparing for Ragnarok. Status of the quarantine barrier? Knox asked. Still active, Admiral. The Assembly hasn't thought to drop it. They're too busy dying to remember we exist. Knox smiled coldly. Good, let them forget us a little longer. Signal the fleet. Operation Mythology begins in 60 seconds. Across Earth's solar system, hidden in the shadows of asteroids and the clouds of Jupiter, 200 ships powered up systems the galaxy had never seen, not because they were advanced, but because they were impossibly primitive. No energy shields, no antimatter reactors, no exotic matter drives. Just metal, ceramic, and weapons that threw chunks of tungsten at significant fractions of light speed. The galaxy had mocked humans for using kinetic weapons. They had laughed at ships armored in metal instead of energy fields. They had dismissed nuclear weapons as the toys of children. They never asked why humans had spent a century perfecting primitive technology instead of begging for advanced alternatives. "Barrier coming down in 10 seconds, Park announced. "The assembly is about to get a surprise." The quarantine barrier, that perfect prison that had kept humanity trapped for a century, flickered and died. Not from the outside, but from within. Every human ship carried a piece of code, a virus written in the galaxy's own programming languages, learned from decades of intercepted transmissions. The barrier wasn't a wall, it was a door, and humanity had just picked the lock. On Station Eternum, Overlord Krex felt the barrier fail. His silicon form crystallized in what his species considered panic. The humans. "The barrier is down. How?" Commissioner Talara's ancient mind processed the implications. "Irrelevant. They cannot help us. Their primitive ships would only feed the shadow swarm. We must focus on—" She never finished the sentence. Proximity alarm screamed as 200 human vessels appeared around Station Eternum, moving in perfect formation. They had been traveling for weeks, engines silent, approaching on ballistic trajectories that sensors dismissed as debris. Now they announced themselves with active scanning that painted every shadow swarm creature in the system. Admiral Knox opened a channel to the assembly. Her face appeared on their screens, and for the first time in centuries, the assembled aliens felt primitive fear. This wasn't the face of a diplomat or a beggar. This was the face of a predator who had been pretending to be prey. "Honored members of the assembly," Knox said, her tone mockingly formal. "I am Admiral Sarah Knox of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We're here to assist with your shadow swarm problem. Please move your ships to the coordinates we're transmitting. You're about to learn why humans tell stories about dragons." Krex's form shifted in confusion. "Admiral, you don't understand. The shadow swarm feeds on energy. Your nuclear weapons will only make them stronger. Your primitive ships will be consumed in seconds." Knox's smile was all teeth. "Overlord, you're right about one thing. The shadow swarm feeds on energy, complex energy, antimatter, exotic particles, directed plasma. The more sophisticated the weapon, the stronger they become. But you know what they can't eat? A tungsten rod moving at 20% the speed of light. Kinetic energy, pure and simple, the kind of weapon you laughed at us for using." Before Krex could respond, the human fleet opened fire. Not with the elegant energy beams the galaxy preferred, but with mass drivers that accelerated metal projectiles to speeds that turned physics into a weapon. The shadow swarm creatures, beings of pure energy and hunger, tried to consume the incoming fire. But there was nothing to consume. Just metal moving so fast it tore through their forms like bullets through smoke. The battle was joined, and it was nothing like the elegant warfare the galaxy practiced. Human ships moved in patterns that seemed random, but followed ancient naval tactics adapted for 3 dimensions. They fought like wolves, pack hunters bringing down larger prey through coordination and relentless aggression. The ship named Beowulf dove through a cluster of shadow swarm entities, point defense cannons firing depleted uranium rounds in spiraling patterns. The vessel Artemis launched nuclear mines, not to destroy but to blind and confuse, creating pockets of electromagnetic interference that disrupted the swarm's coordination. Phoenix took hit after hit, her armor plating absorbing damage that would have overwhelmed any energy shield, then kept fighting with half her hull torn away. Commander Park looked at his display in amazement. "Admiral, it's working. They can't adapt to kinetic weapons. Their evolution never encountered anything this primitive." Knox nodded. "That's because every other species abandoned kinetic weapons once they discovered energy manipulation. They thought it was evolution. But sometimes the old ways are old because they work." The assembly watched in stunned silence as humanity's primitive fleet carved through the shadow swarm like a blade through shadow. Ships they had mocked as obsolete were proving that sometimes simple solutions were the best solutions. Armor plating that seemed antiquated was immune to energy drain. Weapons they had called childish were the only things that could harm creatures of pure energy. But the shadow swarm was vast, and humanity's fleet was small. For every creature destroyed, 10 more appeared from dark space. Knox knew they couldn't win through firepower alone. It was time for the second part of Operation Mythology. All ships implement Protocol Phoenix. It's time to show them why humans tell stories about sacrifice. 20 ships broke formation, accelerating toward the largest concentration of shadow swarm creatures. Their reactors began overloading, but not in the way the galaxy expected. These weren't antimatter explosions or exotic matter collapses. These were simple fusion reactors pushed beyond their limits, creating explosions of pure heat and light and radiation, primitive explosions that the Shadow Swarm couldn't feed on, only be burned by. Captain Maria Santos of the Valkyrie opened a channel as her ship began its death run. To the assembly from humanity. We tell stories about heroes who die for others because we believe some things are worth dying for. Watch and learn. The 20 ships detonated simultaneously, creating a wall of nuclear fire that vaporized 1,000 Shadow Swarm entities. But more importantly, the explosions revealed something. The Shadow Swarm had a source, a massive creature hiding in dark space, birthing the smaller entities. It had remained hidden because no energy-based scan could detect it. But nuclear explosions created something energy sensors ignored: radiation. Simple, primitive radiation that painted the creature in particles the galaxy had forgotten how to see. Knox smiled grimly. There you are. All ships concentrate fire on the following coordinates. Everything we have. The human fleet turned as one. Every mass driver, every missile launcher, every railgun focusing on a single point in space. They fired not energy that could be absorbed, but metal and ceramic and depleted uranium. Thousands of projectiles accelerated to velocities that turned matter into equations of destruction. The Shadow Mother, as humanity would later name it, had evolved to consume energy. It had never encountered a species that fought with accelerated matter. The projectiles tore through its form, each impact disrupting the complex patterns that held it together. It tried to adapt, tried to evolve, but evolution took time and humanity gave it none. With a sound that existed only in subspace, the Shadow Mother died. Across the galaxy, every Shadow Swarm creature flickered and faded, their connection to their source severed. The invasion was over, ended not by the galaxy's most advanced weapons, but by humanity's most primitive ones. The silence that followed was deafening. On Station Eternum, the assembly stood in shocked silence. They had witnessed the impossible. A species they had mocked had saved them all. A fleet they had called primitive had succeeded where their greatest technologies had failed. Elena Reyes, who had never left Station Eternum, stood before the council once more. But this time she didn't stand in the shadows. This time she stood in the center where the powerful stood. "You asked why we tell stories about heroes and monsters," she said quietly. "Now you know. We tell them because we knew monsters were real. We just didn't know when they would arrive. So we prepared for everything. We built weapons you called primitive because we knew that sometimes the oldest solutions are the best solutions. We told stories about sacrifice because we knew that someday someone would need to make that choice." Overlord Krex's form had lost its dismissive solidness. For the first time in millennia, he felt humbled. "We misjudged you. We saw your technology and thought you were primitive. We never considered that you chose to remain primitive, that you were preparing for something we couldn't imagine." Elena nodded. "Every human child knows our stories. Heroes who fight impossible odds, dragons that breathe fire, gods who throw lightning, warriors who never surrender. You thought they were fantasies. They were training manuals. Every story taught a lesson. Every myth carried a truth. Be brave, be ready, be willing to sacrifice. Because monsters are real, and someone needs to fight them." Commissioner Talara spoke, her ancient voice carrying new respect. The Council moves to immediately grant humanity full membership in the Galactic Assembly. All in favor? The vote was unanimous. Admiral Knox appeared on the screen one final time. "Humanity accepts with conditions. We'll share our kinetic weapon technology. We'll teach you how to fight without energy, but in return you'll learn our stories. You'll remember why we tell them, because this won't be the last threat. The universe is vast and full of terrors, and sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and destruction is someone willing to fight with whatever they have." As the human fleet returned to Earth, they left behind more than just salvation. They left behind a lesson the galaxy would never forget. Technology evolves, but wisdom endures. The most advanced weapon isn't always the best weapon. And sometimes the species you mock for believing in myths are the ones who save you when myths become real. Humanity had spent a century behind the barrier, not trapped but preparing. They had studied every transmission, learned every weakness, and built weapons the galaxy had abandoned. They had turned their mythology into methodology, their stories into strategies. And when the darkness came calling, they were ready with fire.